7 years after bloody civil war, Cote d'Ivoire faces political chaos and bloodshed. Laurent Gbagbo is defying international calls to concede defeat in presidential elections. Can this once prosperous nation step back from the brink? This is Inside Story. Hello then, a warm welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. Well, Thabo Mbeki has arrived in Abidjan to try to resolve the tense standoff following presidential elections in Cote d'Ivoire. Incumbent Laurent Gbagbo and his main rival Alassane Ouattara are both claiming victory. Both have taken oaths of office as the political crisis spirals out of control. Gbagbo is backed by the highest legal authority in the land, but the Electoral Commission says Ouattara won most votes, a position backed by the UN, the US, the EU and the African Union. Yvonne Dege explains.
Two leaders as defiant as ever. The political impasse in Cote d'Ivoire is drawing in the African Union with strong statements from the UN and United States. Now news the former South African President Thabo Mbeki has been sent to help mediate between the two men. Incumbent Laurent Gbagbo held a swearing-in ceremony in Abidjan on Saturday. His rival Alassane Ouattara held his own alternative ceremony. The small but resource-rich West African nation now has two men claiming to be president. The UN, US and African Union have all said they won't recognize Gbagbo's re-election after the country's Electoral Commission declared Ouattara the winner of last week's poll.
The UN has been involved with Mr. Choi there as a personal representative of the Secretary General. He had a role in the elections. In fact, we even hear that he had copies of the results. I think that is the reason why all the international organizations and big role players, President Obama, President Sarkozy, all of them have come out. The IMF have come out. So it tells us that they have seen copies of the result.
Under the laws of the land, it's the Constitutional Court which declares election winners. It's firmly backed Laurent Gbagbo, as has the army and state-owned media. Opposition supporters are reacting furiously, calling Gbagbo a thief. Sporadic gunfire and plumes of smoke could be seen and heard in Abidjan on Saturday. The opposition had warned of the risk of war if Gbagbo was sworn in as president. And the country's prime minister has resigned in protest and backed the opposition.
I have the honor to present you with this, my resignation as the Prime Minister, Chief of Government. I would like you to believe, Excellence Minister President, this expression of my high consideration for you. Thank you.
International pressure is now mounting for Gbagbo to relinquish power. With the civil war, which only ended in 2003, still fresh in people's minds, there's a real danger the crisis could turn into all-out conflict.
Well, joining us on the show today in Abidjan, Ambassador Yao Niame, Special Advisor to Laurent Gbagbo on diplomatic affairs. In Paris, editor of Africa International, Marie-Roger Biloa. And in Nairobi, an independent analyst from Peace Caravan, Sam Kona. Welcome to all three of my guests. A very complex issue. Let's start with the ambassador in Abidjan. Thabo Mbeki is in town. Is Laurent Gbagbo open to negotiation?
I am not sure that it is a problem of negotiation. You know, we in Abidjan, in Cote d'Ivoire, we believe that democracy has to promote justice and freedom first. What is going on in our country is similar to what happened in the United States during the US 2000 presidential controversial election. You remember that President George W. Bush won the election, and he was the winner because the Supreme Court of the United States, which is the equivalent of our constitutional court in Abidjan, accepted and agreed to declare Mr. President Bush winner of the election.
Yeah, critics would say, Ambassador, that the difference here is that the constitutional court that you are referring to in Cote d'Ivoire is led by allies of Laurent Gbagbo.
Yes, but remember that the president of the Supreme Court in the United States was a friend of George W. Bush's father. It was a friend of the Bush family. He was a Republican. He was not a Democrat.
But you're not suggesting that there's a parallel, because in this case, the dispute over political results could mean a return to civil war.
No. Who told you about this kind of things? We are a nation. We are a sovereign state. A controversial election cannot lead to a civil war.
Where two separate men have taken oaths of office.
Listen to me. Why didn't you say that what happened in the United States in 2000 led to a civil war in the United States? It was the same.
Okay, let's bring in Sam Cote in Nairobi. Well, I want to get the view of Sam in Nairobi. The ambassador there drawing parallels with disputed results in the United States, where George W. Bush won there. I mean, what are we talking about here?
I think what has happened in Ivory Coast is another clear sign that elections are becoming a real threat to peace and stability in Africa. And the fact that those entrusted with the opportunity to lead African countries tend to disregard, and at best disregard and also see the will of the people with a lot of disdain. What is going on in Ivory Coast and the kind of analogy the ambassador is giving with the elections in the US, there has been a lot of a progressive erosion of the public trust in terms of the institutions that manage elections in Africa, and also the close relationship the military, for example, has with the leading regime in Ivory Coast. All these do not make a good comparison with the kind of institution and structures that we have in the United States. What the Ivory Coast case has demonstrated once again, sadly for the African continent, is the disdain public individuals have on the will of the people. Secondly, it demonstrates the failure of public institutions to stand for the public good. Most of the institutions we have, be it electoral management institutions or the military, instead of focusing their attention in safeguarding the public good and protecting the people and defending the rights of the people and their will, they seem to be serving the regimes, the individuals that are in power. I do not see any correlation between what the ambassador is saying and what is going on in Ivory Coast with what happened in the US.
But there is, I mean, we have to
see the election results.
We have to note that the Constitutional Council, this is the highest legal authority in the country, does say that voters in the north were subject to intimidation, and the election was rigged by Ouattara's supporters. Do we ignore that?
That could be the case, but my point is, to what extent is the public in Ivory Coast, across the country, both in the south and in the north, to what extent do they have confidence in the individuals managing the Constitutional Council? To what extent do they have confidence to the results that have been announced? And if the results that were announced by the Electoral Commission were wrong, what then? Why will the international community, the UN, and all the international actors in Ivory Coast take the position that the results were fair and that the opposition candidate won? What I'm talking about is the public institutions must stand for the public good. And if there was a problem with the results, then the Electoral Commission and the Constitutional Council perhaps should have discussed and involved everybody instead of having this kind of scenario where two presidents have declared themselves president. And above all, I think the most important thing in Ivory Coast now is to ensure that we do not lose any life or destroy any property because of this trouble that has started to unfold.
Let me bring Marie-Roger in from Paris. The ambassador there saying that he doesn't think this situation will lead to a return to civil war. What do you think?
I'm very sad at what the ambassador has said and the comparison he's doing, because what is basically at stake here is bringing back peace to a country which was in trouble, which were in a deep crisis, and which it still is. What is specific about the election, this election, is that they have been postponed because everybody wanted to make sure that the process is regular, that the registration is regular, that the outcome would be regular and accepted. And this election was under the tight scrutiny of the United Nations. And I know I've been following that, I've been working very hard because they know that if there is something wrong with the outcome, the result they have been seeking for years will not be reached, which is peace. So what the ambassador is suggesting is that what is most important for Gbagbo is to retain power against his own people, against the will of the people. And he compares himself to George Bush. I'm afraid that was not the same situation, and I wonder if he will be powerful enough to defy the whole world, because it's basically what is happening, the international community, and above all the Africans.
Let's take a look at the background there, since our guests are talking about the past of Cote d'Ivoire. It is, of course, the world's largest cocoa producer. Once had a thriving economy, but this was destroyed by the brief civil war in 2002 to 2003. Now, Laurent Gbagbo took power in 2000, ironically, after a rigged presidential election was overturned in a popular uprising. His support comes mainly from the south of the country, and he does have the backing of the military. Alassane Ouattara is from the north. Now, he had been banned from taking part in previous elections because of a controversial law preventing anyone with foreign parents from standing. It was said his parents were from Burkina Faso. The civil war was sparked by northern resentment over discrimination. Many said they were refused national identity cards and told they weren't true Ivorians. Mr. Ouattara has much support from northern rebels known as the New Forces. Despite numerous peace deals, the two sides in the conflict have struggled to find a lasting solution. Ambassador, why were elections postponed so many times until this year, and why has there been no further progress towards healing the divisions in Cote d'Ivoire?
I am 50 years old. I was born in Cote d'Ivoire. I studied in Cote d'Ivoire. I have been minister in Cote d'Ivoire, and now I am ambassador, and I am the special advisor of the president. I am not, I don't belong to the ethnic group of the President Gbagbo. I am from the center of our country. I think that people who are talking about Cote d'Ivoire, they don't know our country.
All right, well, let me phrase it a different way. What has been done? What has been done to heal the divisions in Cote d'Ivoire?
Yeah, the division has been done by the international community, you know, because in most of the developed countries, when you use the threats or you use the guns to achieve your political goals, you are called a terrorist. The government, the legal government, don't talk with you. Look at in France, look at in Spain. Any single group who take the guns or the threats to achieve its political goal is called terrorist. But in our case, I was minister at this time. On September 19, 2002, people came from, I don't know, from the north of the country. They killed people, they killed some ministers, they killed some soldiers. And the international community, under the auspice of the United Nations, they ask our president to share the power, this what we call the rebels. You just call the rebels to make sound, because we are developing countries.
Do you think the international community shouldn't interfere in Cote d'Ivoire?
You're not fair in Cote d'Ivoire. They are not fair. Can you ask the French government to share the power with the courts? Can the international community ask the Spain, the government of Spain to share the power with what we call them Basque? No. I think that our country, like a small country or less developed countries, we are under the justice of the winner. Yes, I can say that the international community is not fair in our country. They oblige our president to share the power with those who came into power without a political problem.
Let's have a look at what the UN says about Cote d'Ivoire. The UN says it's deeply concerned by the standoff there. A statement issued by Ban Ki-moon's spokesman says the Secretary-General stresses that the outcome of the presidential election, as certified by his special representative, has been recognised by the broad international community, demonstrating the firm resolve and commitment of the international community towards Cote d'Ivoire. Sam, clearly the international community has taken a big stake in Cote d'Ivoire and in these elections. And you've got, the French are involved. The US president has come out and backed Ouattara. The UN, the EU, they're all making statements over the results of this election. Is there too much interference?
I don't think there is interference. And I would like to mention to my brother, the ambassador, that in Africa, we always tend to blame the international community when we don't get our act together. Anytime the international community intervenes in issues dealing with Africa, and especially this particular one we are referring to, the Ivory Coast, it's because either we have failed in our own obligations, for example, to manage an election or even to transfer power when there is a legitimate winner in the process. That's when the international community intervenes. So if we did our business together and we did it in a proper way, there will be no interference from the international community.
What do you say to that,
amount
Ambassador?
of support the international community has given.
But let me finish. Where was the international community when these people came from the northern part of our country to kill the Home Minister, to kill some soldiers? Where was the international community? Where was Mr. Ban Ki-moon? Where was the international community when the invasion of Iraq took place? Where was this international community? This is what we are asking for. Where was the international community when Mr. Henri Konan-Bédié, our former president, was overthrown by a military coup? Where was the international community in our country?
Let me bring Marie-Roger in from Paris. What do you say to this particular issue about the international community getting involved here?
As Mr. Sam said, of course, the international community is basically called in when the countries fail to solve the problems themselves. And it's good that we have the international community and that this is possible. I just wanted to say something about violence in Cote d'Ivoire. When Mr. Laurent Gbagbo came to power, you cannot say really he was elected. It was such a funny thing where oppositions called for a new election. When he was there, what we know is that there were a lot of death squads in Cote d'Ivoire from the Laurent Gbagbo's people killing opponents. And as a matter of fact, there is a file at the International Criminal Court on that issue. And there were discriminations against northerners, Muslim northerners. And that was such a big thing. We have been covering that for months and months, and the country was so tense. And at some point, a rebellion broke out in the north. It was a mutiny, which became a full-scale war, actually. So what happened is the violence came first from the government, and the rebellion was a reaction to that. So let's not rewrite history. That's the way it was. So now, people have been trying to make arrangements. President Gbagbo's with the opponents, with everyone, with the neighboring countries, Burkina Faso, with South Africa. I remember being there to cover one of the discussions. And so there were agreements about how to proceed to recover peace. And one of the main things was that election. And we have seen how Mr. Laurent Gbagbo has postponed it. Didn't want that election. Didn't want it. So he spent 5 years without being elected. This is a full term. Now,
Mary Rajela, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
place,
we are running out of time, and I just want to ask you: do you think Thabo Mbeki can fix this? Because both men are saying that they have the legal right to be the president. How do we fix this?
You know, I think that being sworn in by the Constitutional Court is not an end in that story. I think the question the ambassador should ask is not if Mr. George Bush rigged election and maintained power and retained power, but what is good for his country fellow man? What is good for Cote d'Ivoire? How do we recover peace? How do we move forward? That's the right question a statement an ambassador should ask himself, and
well,
not how should we keep power for ourselves.
I mean, I know that you talk about the sovereignty of Cote d'Ivoire. Is there a solution here? For example, would Mr. Gbagbo consider a unity government with Mr. Ouattara?
Let me say two things. First of all, the UN Charter is never above any single constitution in the world. The UN Charter is never above any single constitution in the world. Secondly, how can you be involved in a process if you don't trust the rule? Mr. Ouattara has been candidate because he agreed on the rule which will manage the election. We can say that.
But the results are disputed, and you have a political crisis unfolding. So the question is, how do you solve that? You can't just ignore it. How do you solve it?
No. Let me tell you, after the election, the political crisis is over. Why? Because all the actors, they believe that if the Constitutional Court decides, they will agree.
But it's not over for Mr. Ouattara, and it's certainly not over for his supporters who are threatening to take up arms.
No. Before the election, the two candidates, during the debate, they agreed to recognize the decision of the Constitutional Court. And we think that at the end of the election, the Constitutional Court, which is the equivalent of the Supreme Court in the US, with the Constitutional Court in France, the Constitutional Court has decided, and I think that any single citizen in our country who believe in the future of our children and our grandchildren must concede and must accept the decision of the Constitutional Court.
Very quickly, Sam Kona, is it as simple as that?
I don't think it is that simple, and what the ambassador is saying is actually scary. I want to commend the African Union for taking that proactive action to send Thabo Mbeki to Cote d'Ivoire. And I hope Thabo Mbeki is going to at least minimize the prospect of this situation generating into violence or maybe into full-scale war. Secondly, I hope Thabo Mbeki will be firm to the will of the people, and if the Constitutional Court's decision to declare Gbagbo the president of Ivory Coast is against the will of the people, Thabo Mbeki should remain firm to secure the will of the people, because the arguments the ambassador is giving do not add at all.
Okay.
If the Electoral Commission declared the results and the entire international community in support of it, then his role now is to make sure that no life is lost in Ivory Coast and the situation is resolved in as peaceful a way as possible.
It's been a fascinating discussion, and obviously there'll be a lot of eyes on Thabo Mbeki and the developments in Cote d'Ivoire over the next few days. Thank you very much indeed to all my guests for today's discussion. Ambassador Yao Niame in Abidjan, Marie-Roger Biloa in Paris, and Sam Kona in Nairobi. Now, if you have any comments about today's show, do email us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. But from me, Shuli Ghosh, bye-bye for now.